Hello, welcome to part 2 of how to exchange busy for peaceful productivity. Part 1, we talked about what is the difference between busy and productive. And if you have not watched that, please go back and watch that first because it kind of lays the groundwork for some of what we're going to do today. So I've got the link to the first video in the comments. Please watch that first. If you already watched it, welcome. Welcome to part 2. Did you do your homework yesterday? Did you journal and identify where you are on the busy versus productive scale? And did you go download the establishing priorities principle that I shared with you that's free on our previous video? If not, you're going to want to do that today after today's video, please, because it will help you a lot in your processing what you're learning. So today we're going to talk about what is the root of busy? What are the root causes? Why do we step into busy? Yesterday we pretty clearly established that busyness is something we don't really want, right? We don't want to have that energy. We don't want to be operating in busy. It's not fun. It doesn't feel good. It really doesn't. And so we established we don't really want to do that. But why do we keep doing it? Why do we pick up that heavy yoke? Why do we step into busy energy? Well, there's 4 key roots. Now, these are not exhaustive. There might be others, but these are the most common ones, okay? So, again, this isn't a exhaustive list of all the different roots because things can be very connected. But really, from my personal experience, with my own life as well as working with clients, I really have found that busy, the root cause of busy, really can boil down to about these 4 things or multiple of these 4 things, okay? So let's talk about it. What lies at the root of busy? Why do we step into busy? Well, sometimes we step into busy out of people pleasing or a sense of obligation or like guilt. And here's the thing. Obviously, we want to be selfless people. We want to serve. And as Christians, we are called to serve sacrificially. However, the people-pleasing sense of obligation and stepping into busy, sometimes we can put a holy martyr label on it, and it's not actually biblical. Let me explain. Sometimes we operate in this focusing on serving other people and making them happy and feeling obligated to do that. And in our minds, we're justifying it as being holy. Well, I'm sacrificing myself and showing love to them. Here's the deal though. Number 1, are you really? Are you really? Because if you are feeling any sort of resentment or frustration over the fact that you're doing it, that's actually not love. You're doing it out of obligation. And so that's not actually sacrificial love. But number 2, we're not called necessarily, generally speaking, to make everyone else happy at the expense of our own physical and mental health. And Jesus even is an example of this, okay? So Jesus took time. Jesus said no. Jesus took a break. Jesus refused to do miracles in the city of Capernaum because they didn't have enough faith. He wasn't operating out of people pleasing. He wasn't trying to make him happy. If he was trying to make him happy, he'd come do the miracles anyway. Jesus actually said some really harsh things to people that made them really ticked off, right? So this idea that in order to be Christ-like, we need to be martyrs and sacrifice our own health in order to make other people happy is not biblical. It is not biblical. And as a matter of fact, it can be the opposite of love, because if you are killing yourself trying to make other people happy and doing things for them and whatever, you're actually robbing them of the opportunity to grow. So that's one thing I want to bust, because people pleasing and a sense of obligation, it is a root of busy, and it gets in the way of productivity. If you're operating in people pleasing, you really can't operate in productivity. You can't. You're gonna be operating in busy energy. It is what it is. But deeper, let's go a layer deeper. People pleasing and a sense of obligation can be rooted in what I already addressed. So this desire, this people pleasing sense of obligation, it can be rooted in a misunderstanding of spiritual principles that I just kind of addressed and busted a little bit. It can also be rooted in a fear of abandonment or rejection. So people who have experienced really significant, painful situations in their lives where they felt rejected or abandoned or judged, often in an attempt to avoid feeling that pain again, will step into people pleasing and say yes to all the things. And that's a really fast way to get into busy energy. But again, the root is, right, you might identify like, oh yeah, I totally can see that I operate in people pleasing. I have this tendency to do this or feel this sense of obligation, but the spiritual part doesn't really resonate with me. I totally get that. Maybe there's a fear of abandonment or a fear of rejection or a fear of people not liking you or not accepting you. You want to be accepted. You want to be liked. That often will be why we step into busy, because we'll say yes to something we don't actually want to say yes to because we want somebody else to like us and accept us. Another root can be perfectionism. So another root of busy is needing to do it perfectly, right? So perfectionism is where we're constantly working. Things are never good enough, so we're constantly trying to make them better, constantly. Kitchen's never clean enough. The recipe's never quite right. We got to keep perfecting it. Our work is never done. We're going to keep working out of trying to get it perfect. And it becomes a rat race because we're never going to get it perfect, ever. The only person who was perfect was Jesus. The only person who ever did anything perfectly was Jesus. And on this earth, we are never going to get it perfect. There's always going to be something that's not perfect. And so because of that, in the busyness, we're operating out of this need to be perfect, but we're never going to get there, so we never measure up. And this root of perfectionism is rooted in fear of failure, which can also be connected to a fear of abandonment or rejection or judgment, because we're afraid to fail because we're afraid other people will judge us. Or we're afraid to fail because we are not confident in our own self-worth or self-value. So because we lack a grounded identity, we're finding our worth and our value in what we accomplish and how we accomplish it. And that's where perfectionism can really come in. We can take pride in the quality of our work. And there's technically nothing wrong with that. Like, the Lord calls us to be excellent, right? We want to operate with excellence. However, when we're taking pride in the way that to the extent that our identity is tied up in that, that's when we're stepping into perfection and busy energy, because we're placing our identity somewhere other than the Lord. And that isn't going to work in the long run. It's not, it's serving you. It's going to serve you in the moment, right? You're going to feel in the moment like it's working, but in the long run, it's not actually going to get you the results that you want, because you're still going to be operating in stress and overwhelm. So perfectionism, rooted in fear of failure, can also be rooted in a lack of self-worth or self-value or a misplaced identity. And then all of those, again, can be connected to a fear of abandonment or rejection. Another thing is that busyness can be rooted in a lack of clarity. So people who are busy often have very little to no clarity around what their priorities, values, and goals are. And sometimes they don't even have clarity around what their identity is. So people who operate in busyness, they don't know what matters to them. If you ask them what they care about, what actually matters to them, they don't really know, because they are letting other people dictate that for them. And so a lack of clarity around your priorities, your goals, your values, what matters to you, it can be rooted in a lack of self-value. Definitely a lack of self-value, a lack of self-worth, because you disvalue yourself so much that you don't value your own opinions or perspectives or preferences. But it also can actually be rooted in just straight up not knowing how to think or dream for yourself. And this can happen because maybe for the majority of your life, you were told what to do by others. And this can happen a lot. And it can come from your family dynamic. It can come from your educational dynamic, right? Most people come from, like, if you grew up in the traditional education system, your whole life you were told what to do and what to think. That's how the education system works. I know, I worked in it for several years. Is you would go to school, you'd be told you'd be told what time to get there, what you were doing every day, what the right answer was, right? You were just told what to think. You didn't really have to think for yourself a whole ton. Additionally, there's family dynamics where the family can be kind of controlling. You might have grown up in a family where the dynamic was rather controlling. And that doesn't mean that it was super like abusive or horrible. Okay, I'm not saying that at all. There can be some really relatively healthy families that are loving and nurturing and kind, but out of their desire to protect and teach certain values, they can err on the side of being controlling. And many children who grow up in that dynamic where there was a lot of control exerted over them by their parents or their grandparents or family members, they grow up not knowing how to think for themselves because they were always told what to think. And that is often a big root of busyness, because the child who grew up in that environment grew up just being told what to think and believe by mom or dad or grandma or whoever. And then they became an adult and they went to school, maybe you went to college, and kind of similar thing in college, you're told what time classes are at. You have a little more freedom than when you're in, middle school, high school, whatever. But like in college, you're still studying for tests. You're still being told what the right answers are, and depending on the school you go to too, you might again be in a place of control or not. But you go on and you don't really fully learn how to think for yourself and actually identify, what do I think myself apart from anybody else. And so that can be a really huge root of busyness, because when you're operating in this kind of core lack of clarity of I don't know what I think, it's easier to just go with what someone else thinks. And so other ways that this can show up, especially as moms, is if you're kind of constantly swayed by all the different parenting or homemaking opinions on how to do stuff. If you're constantly changing strategies all the time and trying this and trying that and trying this and trying that, you probably are struggling with a lack of clarity around what actually matters to you. So that's a really big one that really contributes to busy. So often it can be rooted in not knowing how to think and dream for yourself. And it can also be rooted in a lack of self-worth or self-value. Now, here's the other thing. Here's the last one, but I'm going to address it. I'm going to kind of preface it by saying all of us, even those of us who've learned how to step out of busy and operate in productivity, we all can have the temptation or tendency to step back into busy, because busy can also be a coping mechanism to help us fill voids that we're experiencing or avoid painful situation or fears. Because busyness is also a way to kind of avoid intimacy or buffer against something that's painful. So if you're going through maybe a relationship issue, that there's a temptation and a tendency to want to step in to busyness, because when we fill our plate with lots of things, it crams our time so full that we don't have time to think about the thing that's painful. Or if we are hurt by a relationship and we want to avoid actually addressing the hurt and like working through it, say with our husbands, we'll fill our time with something so that we can have an excuse to not actually address the issue. So that is how busy can also operate, as a way to kind of, it's a coping mechanism to kind of avoid pain. So if you've experienced a really painful situation in your life or in the past, or that you haven't really healed from, or you're currently experiencing something really painful, that also might be a reason that you are stepping into busy, is because you're trying to avoid addressing that pain. Believe me, I have been there. Just within the last year, I had to work through this a little bit myself. I used to operate in busy all the time. I learned how to step into productivity, and that's my kind of standard mode of operating. But last year, when my baby died, I had an infant loss. My third child passed away at 1 month old last December. And so when I came home and I'm sitting in my house looking around at, 2 months postpartum with empty arms, I felt an emptiness. There was a void. There was pain that I did not want to feel. And so there was a really strong temptation in that season to just fill my plate with all the things and be really busy. And, I did do that for a couple of weeks in December, especially immediately after her death. I did. It was Christmas time. It was kind of like the season where you kind of get a little busy anyway. And I just crammed my schedule really full of lots of things to kind of avoid that pain. But after a couple of weeks, I realized what I was doing, because I've been through these processes and identified, I'm avoiding pain. And so I took a breath, I took a step back, and I started slowing down so that I could let myself process the pain. Because here's the deal, guys. It's natural, it's normal, and it's part of the process to want to step into busy to buffer against pain. But it's not actually going to help. Because what you resist persists. So what you're avoiding, what you're stuffing, avoiding, trying to not deal with, it's actually going to keep being there, and it's actually going to get more painful, kind of like an infected wound. If you think about, like, hey, if you get like a cut, let's say you're gardening and you accidentally nick yourself with a pair of, garden shears, but they were dirty. Well, it's going to hurt. It hurts in the moment, and it's going to bleed, and you're going to have to like go kind of dig, clean it out a little bit. And it's really going to hurt in the moment. But once you get it all washed out and cleaned out and then bandaged, it's going to be able to heal over time and not get worse. Whereas if you leave it, it's going to start festering and get infected and actually get worse over time. Emotional pain is the same way. If we leave it alone and we don't process through it, we just kind of stuff it and try to avoid it, it is still there. It's there, and it's going to dig down and bore down and get some hooks into your soul, and it's going to turn into bitterness and resentment, and the pain from it it's going to actually grow and increase. Whereas if you let yourself address it and process through it, you're going to be able to, it's going to hurt, it's going to be painful, but in the long run, the long run, it's actually going to be better and less painful. So those are the kind of 4 core reasons why people step into busy, what the root of busyness is. You've got people-pleasing / sense of obligation, perfectionism, lack of clarity, avoidance. All of those things can be rooted in a fear of abandonment or rejection, a lack of self-worth or self-identity, an inability to think for yourself, a fear of failure, or a lack of clear identity. So what do we do with this information? Okay, you identified in our previous video where you stand on the kind of scale of busy to productivity. So now what you're going to do is you're going to take some time. I want you to take some time, get a piece of paper, spend some time with the Lord. think about what we just talked about of the different roots of busy, and invite the Lord in and ask him to show you, what is your tendency to busy rooted in? What is it? Is it people pleasing? Is it a fear of rejection? Is it perfectionism? Is it a seeking affirmation from outside sources? Is it avoidance? What is it that's causing you to step into busy? What is your root? And it's possible, these are really the main ones that I have found in my serving of clients, my practice as a coach. But there are others. So that's why I really encourage you to invite the Lord into it and ask him to really show you what your tendency towards busy is rooted in. Because if it's not one of the ones that I just listed, he will show you, because he's our wonderful counselor and he will show us. So that's your homework this week today, is to journal about that root. And if you would like to share that, I would love to hear from you. What ahas you had, what you identified as your root. You can share it in the comments, or if you would like to be more private, you can message to me and share with me what you identified. If you haven't done the homework from the previous video, go do that, and make sure to go download that establishing priorities printable that I shared with you in the previous video, because that is going to help you with next video's homework. All right, friends, I will see you all in our next video. Bye.